Good morning, everyone. Today we're starting the second day of the conference with a keynote. The industry keynote speaker today is Marcin Floryan from Spotify. Marcin has a career at Spotify starting from an engineering manager, director of manager, and as of 2 months ago, he's a technology operations lead at Spotify. And he is a passionate speaker and also very interested in research and fronts one of the research ties of Spotify in Sweden. So I welcome warmly Marcin Florian. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daria, and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming and joining this presentation. I will try to take you on a little journey this morning. And this journey, as it turns out, is into the unknown. I don't know how many of you have watched Frozen 2. Go and listen to the track after the keynote. But we're going to talk a little bit, not about Frozen today, but about the journey of our company from the strongly collocated office-based setup to what probably all of us are experiencing now with working from home and into the future. And I will try to share with you a little bit about our thinking, what that future might bring. So normally, I would invite you into the Spotify office and you would go through this nice little immersive experience to enter into our beautiful lobby. But of course, none of us have seen that lobby for over a year now. But I will try to show you with quite a few pictures as well, I hope, what it used to feel like and what it feels like for some of us now. As Daria said, I'm Marcin Floryan, and right now I'm a technology leads operation, in technology operations leads. Sorry, still new role, so I'm still getting used to that title. I have been at Spotify for 6 years, so that has really given me a little bit of a background on what's going on, how we have been evolving and how we've been working. And also, as Daria mentioned, I've had a chance to participate in quite a few research projects that we've been doing together over time. And that has been a fantastic way to get an understanding of the company and get some deeper insights and maybe some more objective insights into how we're operating and how we can operate better. But today, it's not going to be so much research-based. I will tell you mostly about some of the insights that we've gone through surveys and some research, but mostly really my own observations. So please bear that in mind. They may not be a complete representation of what the whole company does, but I think it'll be a good flavor. So for those of you who haven't had a chance to get a sense of where Spotify is at right now, we've been founded in April 2016. So actually later today, we're going to have a big town hall with Daniel celebrating 15 years of Spotify. And since the beginning, we've now grown to over 7,000 employees, and more than 3,000 of them are working in technology. And by the way, of course, this talk will be focused more on the technology part of the organization. So bear that in mind. We've managed to get more than 300 million that engage with our platform every single month. And over half of them are paying subscribers, so they're willing to actually pay for our service. What is interesting, and I think is a little bit relevant, and I'll bring that up later, is that we're by now in 178 markets. So in a sense, we are very much a global company. And our catalog has 70 million tracks, and as of a year and a half ago, 2.6 million podcast titles. So let's start with this journey into the office. So again, as you entered into the office, you would see something like this. This was a very typical team space in one of our office buildings, where you can see on the left side a row of monitors, desks where the engineers could sit down and work. And on the right side, you can see the gathering space with their wall, with their meeting space. What you maybe can't see, there is also a little meeting room for 2 to 3 people in that space. So you can see that really the design of the office and the layout of that space was very deliberate and purposeful to allow teams to collaborate and be very close together. And if I reflect at a high level at how Spotify teams, which we call squads, worked, I think these are some of the important characteristics that are worth bringing up. That our teams tended to be fairly stable, cross-functional, which means every single team should have all the skills needed to do the job that the team was created to do. And every single team, almost every single team, has an end-to-end responsibility for the pieces of software that they build, right? So it's from inception and design into running in production and operations and decommissioning stuff at the end as well. And what is very typical in our organization as well is that every single team has a very clear and well-defined mission. So as well as Spotify having a clear vision and mission statements, all of our teams have a clear vision and mission statements to help them understand how they're playing a part in the organization. I want to also mention, and I think that has really been very important and is one of the ways in which hopefully you can get a glimpse at our culture, is that many of these spaces that the teams existed in were highly personalized. You know, people would bring their own personal artifacts, photos, pictures, I don't know, favorite keyboard, favorite Lego figures, but also as a team, they would have a team logo, maybe a team mascot, their own colors. So that's how we kind of really integrated the office into the life of the team. And so you can understand that all of our practices relied on a very strong face-to-face collaboration. You can see around the office spaces like this where people could gather like larger groups where you could both have a conversation or simply have lunch, and you would really feel the sense of the company. There's a little audio player here on the side that you can spot. And many of our meetings or gatherings were really intense face-to-face collaborations. This is actually one little snapshot that I took probably a few years ago now of a team meeting, right? And here I wanted to show you as well something that was very popular when we're working together, is that there's a lot of collaboration. So these are actually two teams in a slightly different office setup than the one I started with, but still that partition wall divides two different teams, and you can see people getting their heads together and really pairing and solving problems together in real life. And there was also a lot of this happening in the company where people got together in a more relaxed environment, and this is actually a one-on-one meeting going on. One of our early agile coaches at Spotify, who no longer works with us, said this about generally how Spotify operates, that in his mind, like the team structure worked well for us. And that's, this idea of squads and how they were collocated and how they were cross-functional, because it is well aligned with our culture, technical architecture, our platform, our product, and even our workspace, right? So this idea that our workspace was really purposefully designed to support how the organization worked. So given all that, you can start seeing that maybe working from home and getting distributed across hundreds of locations instead of being together in the office would be quite a challenge. However, there's another aspect that I wanted to bring up before we move on to the second chapter, is that even though we were co-located across in our offices, and if we hired people, we always insisted that they would move to our office and not work remotely. I don't think that before the pandemic started, we had more than a handful of people who were by exception working not in the office on a daily basis. But we didn't just have one office in Stockholm. We actually have 6 different offices. I plotted 5 here. This is like, let's say that these 5 are the key hubs. Okay, so that was 2 offices in Sweden, Stockholm and Gothenburg, 1 in London, and 2 in the US, New York and Boston. So even though our teams were closely knit and in the same location, we've already had a bunch of practices that required us to collaborate and integrate and interact with teams that weren't necessarily in the same physical location, or sometimes not even in the same time zone. Yeah, the 6th office I mentioned was in San Francisco. So that was the background. So what happened when the pandemic hit and the company decided that overnight we're gonna flip the switch, and everyone who was on Friday in the office together in the same space would, from Monday, be in their own office space. By the way, these are authentic photos from our folks at Spotify. So that's what happened, right? From that co-located shared office space, we all ended up with our more or less makeshift home offices where we try to continue our work. And initially everyone thought that's going to last a couple of weeks, then maybe 2 more weeks, and then 2 more months, and then here we are a year later. So it's quite a journey. I want to mention at this point that even though we were so strongly co-located, we had those distributed offices, but we also had a bunch of tools that were very closely integrated into how everyone was working. So there was Slack, where a lot of communication happened. We rely on the Google Suite, so Google Docs, Sheets, Gmail, Calendar, and a lot of people would be using their own devices at work. So from that perspective, it was actually already laying some foundations for us being able to at least not have to depend on the physical office space in terms of the infrastructure of doing the work, right? So that was, I think, quite an important step that meant when we all went home, we could, after our IT department probably 10x the number of VPN servers in the cloud, continue working. So the VPN was already there. We just had to up the capacity, provision a few more links, and most of the activities that were going on, and more importantly, all the access to tools and information that people were using was still there. But I want to say something which is very important in how we really framed and positioned this working from home arrangement at Spotify during the pandemic. This was something that was said in the company and repeated many times in the beginning and since, that we are not just working from home, but we are actually all working at home during a global pandemic. And I think that framing was very, very important, because this brought at kind of center stage the need to take care of something that was always important for Spotify, but suddenly overnight became 10 times more important. And that was this: the support for well-being and mental health. So actually, a lot of the early engagement with the employees who went home was based on making sure that all the managers focused primarily not on continuation of the work that was going or on meeting the targets or goals, but that would primarily focus on supporting the people in the organization with their well-being and their mental health, because we recognized very quickly the level of anxiety and stress that the new working setup caused for people, but also the huge uncertainty globally. We didn't even know if our company could exist in that new reality. But of course, so that meant that we actually created some good foundations, and then that has really been a focus of the company since, and we've been developing support programs and sessions, meditation sessions. We've given people a lot of tools to really make sure that we can support their well-being and mental health. But of course, a lot of things have changed. And I want to talk a little bit about how those changes manifested themselves at three levels: at the level of individual practice of our employees, at the level of team practices, and the level of organizational practices. And I try to mimic here a little bit, if you're familiar with the GitHub contribution heat map, to show you when most of these changes started happening. And actually, in my experience and in my observation, what the first changes that started happening were at the team level. So teams had to very quickly reorient and find new ways of engaging with the work, running their ceremonies. And you can see that kind of intensified and took quite a long time to settle, and it probably never settled. I mean, all of this is ongoing and will be ongoing. Also, you can see in this high-level overview is that the organizational practices, relatively speaking, changed the least, and I will tell you a little bit more why in a moment. And I also want to bring your attention to the fact that it actually took quite a while for the bulk of the individual practices to start, and I think that was quite visible in how our employees were able to adapt to the new situation. So I think most of us have actually hoped that this pandemic will, disappear. This weird virus will go away in a couple of weeks. So most people delayed as much as they could any significant changes to the way they worked. So let's go through some of these changes. And of course, I'm only giving you a little sample here. So as seems to be the global trend, it also happened at Spotify. Many people just realized that they're now at home, so they can get some companion. Everybody took to baking bread, and of course, a lot of people invested in better internet connectivity to be able to continue working. But those maybe social aspects aside, as I mentioned, like on the level of individual practice, there was this delay in adaptation to new reality. And if you listen to the keynote yesterday, Peggy mentioned the tale of two cities, and that was something that, for those of you who weren't there, was this idea that even though we have all this workforce, really the reality for people was a certain duality. Like there is a group of people who have actually suddenly felt much better. They had comfortable homes with space to work, and they could really focus. They had good internet connectivity. And then there was this whole other group, and still is, of people who have maybe had small apartments with only a kitchen table to work at, or with families, with kids suddenly that stopped going to school, with partners who also started having meetings in the same space, where people would have to go out to the balcony to have a meeting, not to interrupt the other person. So that is something that we've seen, and that is something that is really important to also keep in mind when I show you the summary or tell you about like what in aggregate how we feel it has gone for Spotify, because there's definitely a big group of people that have been much worse off in this new reality. But what has been that I've heard quite a few times is that one of the very evident things that have changed in this everyone working from home reality was a sense of creation of a level playing field when it comes to cross-office collaboration. So even though for the teams, collaboration maybe suffered a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about this as well in a moment, the sense that we suddenly all had to be on video, from on the screen, whereas in the past it would not be uncommon that we would have a team of people in Stockholm talking to one or two people remotely in Gothenburg, or talking to one or two people remotely in New York. And everybody suddenly felt that it's a difference. Like it is very different from being in the same room with others to being on screen and finding it hard to get your point across or to interrupt someone else or to make sure that everyone speaks. So that was like this interesting, very early positive indicator for a lot of people. And strangely, actually, it also created like a level playing field for people, even if they were in the same team, because maybe suddenly it became easier to speak up, because now you had to like explicitly say, go around the room, or go around the screen in this case, right? And ask everyone to have their opinion. What people have very clearly, like those, especially those who had good environment and good practice, realized that they started being able to have a bit longer focus time. The distractions of the office, the going for coffee, standing up for a meeting, or just colleagues finding something exciting in the code base, that disappeared. And so that for many created this opportunity for better focus and longer focus time. Many people started dedicating deliberately more time to physical activity, going for runs over the lunchtime, or taking the commute time to do some exercises. We've seen a lot of walking and cycling desks, as well as standing desks, as you see here today now with me. And then actually Peggy yesterday mentioned the same, that she moved to a standing desk. A lot of people did that. One of the practice that became very common was that many of the meetings that started being a little bit difficult on video, and I'm sure you all have heard the term Zoom fatigue. So we've changed a lot of these meetings to walk and talk, especially if we didn't need a computer, and especially if these were one-on-one meetings. They are very often now conducted by the two people having a little walk in their own location, hopefully safely distancing themselves, and very often without video. And for many of us, that reminded us of what like talking on the phone was like, and that you could actually get a lot of information across. And sometimes it's actually easier to focus on the content of the conversation, because there's only audio and there's only this one medium, even though you don't get the visual cues from people. What we've also seen for a lot of people is a shift in working hours. So maybe starting earlier because you don't have a commute, maybe working over lunch, maybe taking a break in the afternoon when the kids come home, and then maybe working a little bit longer in the evening. So that has definitely started a shift that we just expect to continue. Let's look quickly at the team practices. So when it comes to team practices, the most obvious change was this. Like many of our teams had a physical board that could no longer, of course, function. So there were actually people, trying to run back to the office to take the picture of the board so that they could digitalize it. So that was the first big change. All of those physical walls migrated to some online tool, and actually our teams tend to use a variety of tools. So everyone chose what was good for them. And then, I summarized everything in this: move all activities online. And actually, for so many activities, it just worked. The stand-up was suddenly just an online meeting. The retrospective could be taken online with some digital whiteboard. You've seen the logo of one of the tools that we now use prolifically, which is Mural. I know other companies use Miro, which is very similar. But it turned out that moving planning sessions, moving retrospectives, moving all these explicit meetings online was actually quite simple, and didn't change the nature of those meetings that much. What we've noticed, though, is that the stand-up meetings became longer because there was much more of information sharing that would normally happen during the day when you work together, and that didn't happen anymore. And initially, people felt a bit guilty that those meetings are longer, that stand-up should be snappy and quick. But I think by now everyone accepted that it's actually a good thing that we have this time dedicated to sharing what's going on. Many teams created what they call always-on meeting spaces. So this would be, some meeting where people could just come in and out of during the day to have a casual conversation or just to work alongside without necessarily talking, but with this being able to look to the side, ask a question. As we've seen, and actually Daria had some research to back this up, we've seen a little bit less pairing with the teams. Like people started focusing more on individual work, and of course we use GitHub and pull requests. So some of that collaboration moved to pull request collaboration, pull request reviews. And other than having a lot of ad hoc problem solving, the teams moved to more explicit problem solving. But mostly, we basically mirrored what was in the office into the digital world, and some teams starting slowly to create new practices, and I think that will be very important for the future. I also want to mention like this little term that we coined early on of the idea of the context buffer. So we said in the early days, people were rich with context on what was going on, where they were going, what was the plan, so it was very easy to continue. And as the time went on, of course, that context buffer depleted a little bit because we didn't have all that information anymore. So that was also something that we started more deliberately investing in to make sure that people continue to have this context to know where we're going, where we go. And of course, there's at least, in the Swedish culture, this beloved practice of having an informal coffee meeting called fika, where people would gather, have a coffee break, eat something sweet usually. And that was also something that, of course, was irreplaceable online. But actually, many teams continue to have this very explicit social activity during the week for half an hour, where they just meet online. Everybody would get maybe even a cinnamon roll and a cup of coffee or tea, and just chat about, what they're going to play on the weekend or what they're going to try and watch on Netflix and what was the new series worth binging. And then let's look briefly at the organizational practices. And actually there, the change was simple. Let's move everything online. And first of all, a lot of our high-level organizational practices, like all-hand meetings, were already all online because of the offices that I mentioned before. So town halls, show and tells, these were activities that everyone was already used to having online. But we also had an onboarding program. We had a lot of learning and development programs. We had like developer conferences happening yearly, Hack Week happening yearly, all very based on the office space. And in the last year, we've managed to migrate all of them, roughly in that order that I gave you in this list, online. And it turns out that the onboarding program carries on and takes people for a week-long journey. And what we actually seen is that a measure of onboarding that we use at Spotify, which is time to the 10th pull request, remained pretty stable. And that actually, probably 200 or so engineers that we've onboarded since the pandemic started, who have never seen the office, as well as managers, report, at least in casual conversations, that they feel well integrated into the company, that they understand how to navigate it and how to do their work. So that was a bit surprising, but it was good. And that's really the testament to the team that has built and shifted that onboarding program online. We have shifted a lot of classes online, but again, this was not something new in the industry. LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, all that has existed for a long time. We've just found ways to move our own content to a similar format. And then finally, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, we've held our first virtual developer conference where 600 or 700 participants from around the world could meet, do talks, have casual chats. And, as you're seeing, this tool and many other tools are popping up now to facilitate these kind of gatherings and events digitally. So we've just taken advantage of that, and it worked fairly well. What has changed more significantly, though, is that the company decided to and especially the company Daniel and the lead team decided in the first 6 months of the pandemic in particular, communicate way more frequently with the employees. Like in the beginning, I think we would have an opportunity to see and talk to Daniel, and I say we, the entire company, almost weekly, right? So that was this recognition of we no longer have this casual time. We really want to sustain the connection. We want to show people that that we care and that the ever-evolving situation is changing. So, these meetings would talk about how we're doing, how people are doing, what's happening with the corona pandemic, all these things, some of them just being social, but really created this engagement and connection. And actually, people really, really appreciated that much higher bandwidth of communication, especially from the lead team, even though only on video, right? Something that I really want to stress here in terms of the practices, so all of this so far kind of felt like it was pretty easy to do. But something that we care about that wasn't so easy to shift online is the sense of belonging, creating the sense of community. And I'm just going to share with you one practice that we came up with that is now applied fairly regularly, something we call the home site. So in our company, as I'm sure many other companies do as well, conferences or off-sites, right? Meetings where the whole teams or departments gather together to just spend some social time and maybe do some work together. And we really try to recreate that space digitally, online. So here you can see my former tribe all on the big screen in my living room. But what I want to take focus on here is this little box that stands in the middle. That was the way in which we tried to create this sense of still community and belonging. We're sending people, all people, the same little packages, and then in that shared meeting, experience together, even though away, something like unwrapping this package and seeing, what's inside it, what's the surprise. And one of the surprises actually was that we all got a little, in one of those packages, one of the home sites got a little plants to grow. And then, of course, everyone got their plants at home and shared pictures of how they progress and sprout. And that's another example of like this, little silly shared experience of growing a plant helped us maintain this sense of community. And of course, wherever it was possible, as you can see with some social distancing measures, with people still try to meet, in a park for a picnic as much as it was possible when the lockdowns were not in place. Of course, it wasn't possible everywhere in the world. So how is it going? As you have probably heard now, generally in most of the research, and this holds true, there's no significant difference in productivity. And productivity, as we know, it's super hard to measure. So for mostly some indications of activity that happens, it feels, and perception, it remains fairly stable. And most people consider that it's going well for them, actually, given the circumstances. More than 70% say that. People also say that they feel they have the infrastructure to support them, both in terms of the digital infrastructure, the tools, connectivity, but also the home office setup, which we've actually provided a stipend to every employee to be able to equip their home office to be able to work in an ergonomic space. And that they continue to collaborate in and across the teams fairly effectively. The three things that remain really challenging, and this data actually comes from our couple of internal surveys that we've done over the last year, is that maintaining good work-life balance is challenging. That sense of belonging is deteriorating. Even though I've shown you this. I attempt at doing lots of activities that would hopefully help with that sense of belonging, but it's still very hard to keep going. And then the well-being and mental health is impacted negatively. And that's not a surprise, again, regardless of the support that we try to give to our people. the times are unprecedented, and everyone suffered some sort of loss and go through grief, and that's very hard. Okay, so where are we going? Chapter 3. What is this future, and what is this working from anywhere? So Spotify, since actually beginning of 2020, before the pandemic, already had this ambition to become a distributed first company, enabling our talent to create value for Spotify independently or where they work, and remove constraints for scaling the platform. And it turned out that that was pretty spot on when the pandemic started, because we were just able to accelerate that 2025 ambition and make it a reality over pretty much a year. I want to highlight something that is, I think, super important here, which is that we're talking about being distributed, not remote. And that's an important distinction for us, because we want to highlight that in a way that Spotify works, there is really no center. And remote suggests that there is some central place, and there are some places that are remote, away from the center. But we really want to highlight that it's everyone being distributed and dispersed, and more thinking about this as a network of people rather than a tree or graph, or like a central hub. There's not going to be a central hub. We've came up with this notion of stages of distributed work, and that has been inspired by five levels of autonomy from from Matt, who's running Automatic. And you can see those 5 stages, from location dependent to distributed work enabled, which is where we think we were before the pandemic, to equal work contributions regardless of where you are, to finally moving more into asynchronous work, and the new productivity being enabled by this fact. So really taking advantage of the fact that people are everywhere. And have more freedom and flexibility to work. And that's where we want to get to. I think we're somewhere in the middle right now, around the equal work contributions at best. So Spotify introduced this Work from Anywhere program, which allows all of our employees to choose whether they want to do something we call the home mix, which is working from home, or do something which we call the office mix, which is going back to the office. And this is basically driven by many beliefs, but one of them is that the work isn't something that you come to the office for, but it's something you do, right? And you can do it in many ways, with flexibility, with different ways that fit your particular needs, and not necessarily the needs of the company or the manager to see you or to be there. And just some quick stats from what our folks so far have decided. It seems like people are choosing roughly 40-60 between home mix and office mix. So 60% of people still want to go back to the office, but 40% will not. It seems like smaller offices appear to favor going back to the office. So in Gothenburg, for example, we see that number of people going back to the office is even higher. And we think that that's because they have shorter commute, so it's easier. There are actually no significant changes in how people make those choices across disciplines, whether you're a manager, an IC, or tenure. And there's so far only a small proportion of people choosing to move countries, which is something we also enabled in this working from home mix selection. But there are many more people that we started hiring now that will not move to Sweden or England or US. And what we also have already some insights into is that the people who are choosing to come to the office, actually that they declare that most of them will be in the office for 3 to 4 full days in a week, rather than spending the full week in the office. And the key reason for that is people want more focused work. They think they can get more focused in the office. They want face-to-face interactions and collaboration. And even the home mix people still aim to visit the office a few days a month. So this has kind of led us into this notion of creating a distributed first organization. When we come back to the office, or some of us come back to the office, we really want to shift into the distributed first mindset. And that means following these principles roughly, which is that We want everyone to have equal terms independent of your work location, that we really aim to prioritize asynchronous communication over synchronous communication. So more writing, less talking. We want to encourage everyone to work even more explicitly, transparently, so that others can see what you're doing. We want to focus on impact and outcomes rather than the work and time spent being busy. We will encourage people to carry on documenting everything, especially meeting minutes if there continue to be meetings, hopefully way fewer of them, but more importantly, documenting things like agreements and documenting things like decisions that were made, which were before could be made in a meeting and everyone was in the meeting participating, understanding why the decision was made. Now we really will aim to make sure that these things are much better documented. And we have this notion of being distributed yet still remaining connected. And so I think when it becomes possible, meeting face-to-face at regular intervals, monthly, quarterly, will remain super important. And wherever our people will be, we will make sure to invest in bringing them together. And we will, of course, invest in changing probably our existing office designs to create greater space flexibility, create functional neighborhoods, as we call them, so that there are, maybe this is the place where HR sits in the office, and maybe this is where this is the neighborhood for the tribe, maybe no longer a very strictly dedicated team spaces. But I think in the initial phase, we will still have dedicated team space, even though not all the people in the team may be back in the office. We'll definitely create more collaboration spaces, and we're looking at technology to support distributed work. I'm actually really excited into what's coming up, like what all the innovation that may happen in this space. And even when it comes to the office design, we're thinking very hard about the equitable experiences between home and office. How can we make people feel like they're part of the conversation if some of us are in the office and some of us are at home? And I think we are beginning to have some nice technology to support that. So I want to close this off with another of our beliefs, which perhaps creates a good research opportunity, although I'm sure there will be many more, which is this belief that we have that operating as a distributed organization will produce better and more efficient ways of working, though through more intentional use of communication and collaboration practices, processes, and tools. So we really need to figure out and discover and validate which of these new collaboration practices, processes, and tools that we no doubt have to experiment with and discover will be more effective. And with that, thank you so much for your attention. And I hope you have some questions. I know we have maybe I left a few minutes for us to have some questions now, but if you find any more questions that you're interested in, reach out to me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. On behalf of everyone, the one that has a microphone, I would like to applaud to you, Marcin. Thank you for the great talk, as also seen in the chat. People appreciate it a lot. So I will now read the first question, and it's from Stefan Zower. He writes, I like the tale of two cities. And do you think that companies should take more responsibility in providing a reasonable work environment for their employees, either at their home or at least during the pandemic, by providing more isolated workplaces? Mm-hmm. And did Spotify do or plan anything in this regard?
So as I mentioned, many things come to mind here. First of all, I would say that Spotify has absolutely taken that seriously by, basically giving people both tools to understand what a better work environment at home could be. So this is some training and education, what like ergonomic working spaces are like, but also by allowing people to buy office equipment, I don't know, a desk, a chair, a monitor, a charger, things like that for home. So that's the first thing. What I didn't mention explicitly, but is part of our Work from Anywhere program, is also the ability for people to choose to work not from the office, but also not from home. So we are going to subsidize work in a collaborative spaces, so co-working spaces around the world. So I think that's something that will hopefully happen. What we're doing in terms of the office during the pandemic is we're basically saying our offices will remain closed as long as the pandemic is ongoing, and as long as nobody, as long as people don't get vaccinated and we don't have a pandemic under control, we encourage everyone to isolate, practice social distancing and stay at home, basically. So we're not looking yet at reopening the offices and bringing people in, although we have absolutely created exceptions and supported some people who really couldn't work at home and didn't have a co-working space around that was open to come back to the office. So maybe now, in one of our offices that has 9 floors, there are probably 10 people working because they literally couldn't work at home.
Thank you. Very interesting.
If I may, Daria, I just want to address the other thing, which is, the responsibility for the work environment. And I think that is something that is going to change. And of course, especially like in Swedish law, we will continue to have that responsibility in Sweden. But I think that responsibility will have to shift to employees more, especially when it comes to practices around organizing your own day and making sure that you have a good work-life balance. Like, we will continue to help you and equip you with tools, but we will not control how many hours you work. That you will have to do that.
Thanks. Next question is about onboarding. So Tor from Norway, from Sintef, a new employee there, asks, what online activities do Spotify do in onboarding, and what was the differences compared to physical onboarding? And great talk. And I would like to also add a question that interests me as well in this respect. You have shown us the really interesting insights into your offices, and it must have been a big attractor for new employees. How would you advertise Spotify nowadays?
So, you know what, I think what is interesting about, so let's start with onboarding, and then because I'm super tempted to already jump into your question, Daria. But what happened so our onboarding program has been always built around the idea that we gather together new people who join Spotify and get them to do something together. So they usually actually form a team that builds something together. So there's a little bit of education that we just take you through classes and show you, okay, how the company works, what the values are, what the tools are that we use. But we also always got you together with more starters and ask you to build something together. And that just continues online now. And people really appreciate this because they have something concrete and specific to collaborate on, to really put their newly acquired skills into practice. But it also creates a little community of people who joined at the same time and kind of seeds their social network, so to speak. And a lot of these people continue to have Slack channels and some talk and collaborate there. So that's what we've done. Of course, we've also moved some of the online classes to be self-taught materials and documentation, and some of them are still online classes. To answer your other question around the attraction, I think our office was in some ways just a representation of our values and the company culture. And so this collaborative, fun, engaging, passionate culture will remain. And I really hope that, if anything, Spotify will become more attractive to people and more interesting because of the freedoms that we will provide. Because you really can choose and structure your life around your life, not as much around your work. So I know that there's a lot of people who always wanted to work for Spotify, but would never imagine moving to Sweden, for example.
I see. Thank you. A follow-up question: will the tower office in New York remain yours?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, very much. And because we're not giving up office space, we believe that the use of that space will change, but we believe that office space will be very important for people to get together to, there are some types of collaboration that are very hard to do online. So we will absolutely be bringing people together for activities, for community building, for belonging, but also for innovation collaboration.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Reda. Is there a difference in point of view regarding work from home versus employees' point of view? And what's the percentage among the 60% that want office mix that are managers?
So as I said, there is actually very little difference. So I would say if you only take the manager population, the choice is also 40-60. And what is interesting that I've heard a lot from our managers, they're both making those choices on their own behalf, like what is their personal preference, but they're also making those choices considering their impact on being able to work with the rest of the team, which is many of the managers say, I actually want to work from home because I really want to continue to experience what it's like. So that's one of the drivers as well, right? So to make sure that I can see the work from the perspective of our diverse workforce, some of whom will work from home. So I'm sure that that will remain important to make sure. I think it really is going to be much harder, actually, in a way, when some people come back to the office and some people remain at home, because there will be a natural imbalance, and we'll have to work really hard to minimize that imbalance.
Next question from Paulo. Can you give us insights aspect? If we agree that this forced work from home situation will end, we will see a shift into hybrid setup. You left us hanging with the practices and actions you mentioned. You're taking equitable aspect.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is very true that I left you hanging there because we don't know. I think we don't know what it will look like in practice yet, because we haven't experienced this, right? So it's very hard to theorize about this. Like, we have some ideas, but what we know is that here are some specific examples of what we want to make sure will happen. Is, for example, that you can continue to be promoted regardless of whether you be in the office or you're going to be at home. Or you can actually take any role, unless that role really has some dependency on physical space, at different levels of seniority or different kinds of roles, regardless of whether you choose to work from home or choose to go into the office. So of course this will influence our promotion practices, our evaluation practices in some ways. A lot's going to change here, but we really have this commitment to making sure that we continue to have the pulse on people feeling like they're not missing out on information. So another example that we've had was that, so when people come back to the office and some of them have a conversation around the coffee machine, we will have to continue to nudge them and help them say, like, okay, so if you had an interesting design conversation over coffee, please make sure that you share this with the rest of the team who weren't there. And that means like capturing some of these things, which is currently feels counterintuitive and really hard with a lot of friction. So it's going to be hard to change that practice, but we believe it's going to be possible.
Thanks. More value for documentation instead of presence in meetings. Don't be counter-agile. And this resonates with my question yesterday as well.
Okay, so I love this question, and I know that there is a very strong association, or perception at least, that agile ways of working means no documentation. And I actually disagree with that view of agile. My view of agile is that we are we decide to not. So basically, a lot of the heavy documentation from the past was meant as a replacement for collaboration and conversations. So I think that is how I understand the agile shift. It's not that we want to throw away all the documentation and now just have conversations. And I think actually a lot of companies and teams suffer from this assumption that when they're becoming agile, they don't need to document anything. But the documentation needs to be lightweight, and it needs to be easy to be created, closer to code, easy to change, but it still needs to be there because that's how we're sharing context, because that's how we create some continuity, because that's how we can make sure that we don't have a single person dependencies in the team. So I don't see documentation as counter-agile. I see heavyweight documentation that aims to replace conversations as counter-agile.
But what about the teamwork? So if the teamwork will have as a company to stimulate and remind people to work those that are not remote but distributed, right? I have a feeling that it will feel like remote, and are fully remote. Will they actually be this teamwork-oriented culture?
So, of course, we would like to believe that the answer is yes, but I don't know. I think we will still continue to find ways to go back to having the pairing sessions, having maybe mock programming sessions online, because there's like the tooling now exists to enable these things. So that is great. But yeah, we'll see what happens.
I see a lot of questions unanswered.
Oh.
In a positive way, that research, there is space for research.
Yes, oh, very much so.
We are all experiencing this as a life change, I guess.
Exactly. But I think there is, I think there is something about the freedom and the sense of, sense of even bigger sense of agency on behalf of employees in this new, more flexible setup of work, which will allow them to still, then that creates more energy to invest in this collaboration working together. I think that's the thing that we're really thinking and hoping for, right? And it is very clear that the both sense of belonging and the ability to collaborate is something that remains important for people and is something that we continue to hire for.
Thank you very much. On this positive note, let me leave people to refill their coffee mugs and return to the next session. A lot.
All right, thank you so much for being here and listening, and yeah, good luck with the future.
Thank you.